I began questioning not just the world but myself, and by extension, my relationship with David. Don't get me wrong, I still loved him. But I started wondering if love was enough. Was it enough that he didn't share the same urgency about the world's issues? Was it enough that we could laugh about tomatoes at the farmer's market while ignoring the bigger picture? I wasn't sure anymore. We started having small disagreements, little cracks that formed along the once smooth surface of our relationship. It wasn't that David didn't care. He did in his way. But his way felt too small, too passive. I remember one evening, sitting at dinner, trying to explain how I felt about something I'd read. It was an article about climate change and the responsibility of individuals to push for systemic change. I was animated, passionate, and I wanted him to be too. Instead, he shrugged and said, "Yeah, it's terrible, but what can we really do about it?" That comment stuck with me. It wasn't just what he said, but the ease with which he said it. It felt like a wall had gone up between us. I didn't want to argue, but I also didn't want to let it slide. So I pushed. "But don't you think we have to try? Isn't doing nothing just as bad as contributing to the problem?" He sighed, setting down his fork. "Laura, not everything has to be a debate. We can care about things without letting them consume our lives, you know?" That was the beginning of the deeper rift. I didn't want everything to be a debate either, but I couldn't ignore what was happening to me. It felt like I was waking up to the world, while David was content to stay asleep, and that terrified me. Over time, our arguments became more frequent. They were never loud or explosive, but they were constant. Little jabs, misunderstandings, moments of frustration. I felt like I was speaking a new language, one David couldn't or wouldn't understand. He felt like I was changing, like I was leaving him behind. Maybe I was. I didn't know how to explain it to him without making it sound like he was the problem. Because he wasn't. Not really. But I also couldn't ignore the growing feeling that we were headed in different directions. Then came the night that everything boiled over. We were at another dinner with friends, the kind of evening that used to feel so effortless. Someone brought up politics, and I couldn't help myself. I started talking about the things I'd been reading, the changes I wanted to see in the world. At first, everyone seemed engaged, even supportive. But then David chimed in, casually brushing off the conversation with a joke. I can't even remember what he said now, but at that moment, it felt like a betrayal. After the dinner, we drove home in silence. When we got back to the apartment, I couldn't hold it in anymore. "Why do you always do that?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Why do you make jokes when I'm trying to talk about something serious?" He looked at me, confused. "I wasn't trying to undermine you. I just don't think every dinner has to turn into a debate club." "It's not about debating," I said, frustrated. "It's about caring. About showing that these things matter to you." "Do they even matter to you?" He paused, and in that moment of hesitation, I felt my heart sink. "Of course they matter," he said finally. "But I don't think we have to change who we are or make every conversation about fixing the world. Isn't it enough to just live our lives and try to be good people?" I didn't know how to respond to that. To him, it probably sounded reasonable. But to me, it felt like giving up. I wanted more for both of us. And for the first time, I realized he might not. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest of my life. We tried to patch things up, to go back to the way things were. But it wasn't the same. I was growing restless, and David was growing resentful. The love was still there, but it felt weighed down by everything we weren't saying. Every conversation became a minefield, every silence a chasm we couldn't bridge. One night, after another quiet dinner, David finally spoke up. "Laura, I can't keep doing this," he said, his voice steady but strained. "I feel like I'm constantly failing you, like nothing I do is ever enough." I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that he was more than enough, but the words caught in my throat because deep down, I wasn't sure if that was true anymore. Instead, I said, "I just want us to be on the same page." "And what if we're not?" he asked, his eyes searching mine. "What if we're never on the same page? Does that mean this doesn't work anymore?" I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that I loved him, but love wasn't supposed to feel this heavy. We sat there in silence, the weight of unspoken truths pressing down on us. Finally, David broke the quiet. "You know," he said, his voice soft, "I used to think love was about finding someone who made life easier. But maybe it's about finding someone who challenges you, who makes you see the world differently." I nodded, tears streaming down my face. "And maybe it's about growing together, even when it's hard." He shook his head, a sad smile tugging at his lips. "Or maybe it's about knowing when to let go, even when it hurts." That was the moment I knew. We both knew. It wasn't about who was right or wrong, or whose perspective mattered more. It was about the fact that we were no longer moving in the same direction. We stayed up all night, talking about everything, our hopes, our fears, the love we still had for each other. By morning, we had made the hardest decision of our lives. We would part ways, not because we didn't care, but because we cared too much to keep holding each other back. Saying goodbye to David was the most painful thing I've ever done. But as I walked away, I knew it was the right choice. Sometimes, love isn't enough to bridge the gap between two people. And that's okay. Because in letting go, we gave each other the chance to grow in ways we never could have together. He never questioned the way things were. David was the kind of person who went with the flow, someone who believed in letting life be easy and uncomplicated. For a long time, I admired that about him. His calm, carefree approach balanced my own tendency to overthink. But lately, something had changed. It started subtly, like the faint hum of a distant radio station you don't notice until it grows louder. I began to see little things about his friends, their jokes, their offhand comments, even their social media posts. Things I'd once laughed off or ignored now felt unsettling. At first, I told myself I was overthinking. It wasn't like they were bad people, they just didn't see the world the way I was starting to see it. It all began with the book club. What started as a casual escape quickly turned into a journey of self-discovery. Each book we read peeled back another layer of how the world worked, or didn't work. Discussions that followed often left me both inspired and shaken, making me question things I'd never even thought about before. One night, I brought it up to David, hoping to share what I was feeling. "Have you ever noticed how some of your friends don't really seem to get the bigger picture?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He didn't look up from his phone. "What do you mean?" "They're just guys, Laura. They've always been like that." I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. "Yeah, but don't you think it's a little off? Some of the things they say about the world, about people, it just doesn't sit right with me anymore." David finally glanced at me, his expression a mix of confusion and mild irritation. "We're all different, Laura. That's why they're my friends. We don't have to agree on everything." He didn't get it. Or maybe he didn't want to. His dismissive shrug left me feeling unheard, but I let it go for the moment. I didn't want to make it a big deal, except it was a big deal. As the weeks passed, the differences between us became harder to ignore. While I was diving into conversations about systemic issues, inequality, and the importance of empathy, David and his friends were cracking jokes about the latest reality TV drama. I started noticing the way his friends dismissed certain topics with a wave of the hand or a poorly timed joke. "People just need to work harder," one of them said during a casual hangout. Another chimed in, "Not everything has to be about politics, you know." It wasn't just their words, it was the attitude behind them. They didn't care. I tried to bridge the gap, to pull David into the world I was discovering. "Why don't you come to book club with me one night?" I suggested, knowing full well it wasn't his thing, but hoping he'd surprise me. "Book club?" He laughed. "That's your thing, Laura. It'd feel out of place. Or you could just read one of the books," I pressed gently. "I don't need to read more," he said, brushing me off. I get it. But he didn't. One night, everything came to a head. We were out with his friends at a bar, the usual crowd, the usual banter. Someone brought up healthcare, and before I could stop myself, I jumped in. "Really?" I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "You don't think the system's a little messed up?" The guy across from me rolled his eyes. "People just need to get jobs, Laura. It's not that complicated." I could feel my face heating up. "It's not that simple," I shot back. "There are people working 3 jobs who still can't afford healthcare. How is that fair?" David gave me a look, one I'd come to recognize as his silent plea to let it go. "Laura," he said with forced calm, "we're just having a fun time. Don't take everything so seriously." I turned to him, incredulous. "How is it fun to pretend things are fine when they're not?" The table went quiet. David shifted uncomfortably in his seat, then laughed nervously, trying to lighten the mood. "We're not solving the world's problems tonight, Laura. Chill out." I bit my tongue, but the damage was done. I spent the rest of the evening quietly stewing, feeling more out of place than ever. As the weeks went by, I found myself avoiding those gatherings. I didn't want to sit there pretending to laugh at jokes that felt tone-deaf or nod along to conversations that ignored the realities I was beginning to understand. Instead, I spent more time with my book club friends, the ones who weren't afraid to have hard conversations, to challenge their own beliefs. They made me feel seen, heard, and understood in a way David's world never did. I started pulling David into my world, hoping he'd see what I saw. I invited him to meet my book club friends, suggested documentaries we could watch together, tried to talk about the things that mattered to me. But he wasn't interested. Every time I brought it up, he'd brush it off. "I don't need to change who I am, Laura," he'd say. "Why can't you just let me be me?" It wasn't about changing him, it was about growing together. But he couldn't see that. Or maybe he didn't want to. Finally, one evening, I couldn't hold it in any longer. We were sitting on the couch, the TV humming in the background. I turned to him, my heart pounding. "David," I began, my voice trembling, "I don't think this is working." He looked at me, startled. "What are you talking about?" I took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "I've changed. I'm not the same person I was when we met, and I don't think you've even noticed." His expression shifted, hurt flashing across his face. "So, what are you saying? That I'm not good enough for you anymore?" "No," I said quickly. "It's not about being good enough. It's about growth. I need someone who's willing to grow with me, to see the world the way I see it now." He stared at me for a long moment, his jaw tightening. I'm not changing who I am, Laura. If that's what you need, maybe you're right. Maybe this isn't working. His words hit me like a punch to the chest, even though it expected them. For a moment, we just sat there, the silence between us louder than anything we could have said. And just like that, it was over. The days that followed were a blur of emotions, relief, sadness, guilt. I couldn't help but wonder if I'd made a mistake, if it'd been too hard on him, too caught up in my own journey. But deep down, I knew the truth. We were heading in different directions, and no amount of love or compromise could change that. Sometimes, I still think about David. I wonder if he's happy, if he's found someone who fits seamlessly into his easygoing world. And I wonder if he'll ever find someone who fits into mine. But for now, I'm learning to be okay with the uncertainty, to embrace the discomfort of growth. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that staying true to yourself is worth the risk, even if it means letting go of someone you love.